You walk into networking events feeling like everyone can see right through your facade of confidence. Every conversation feels like a performance where you're forgetting your lines, while others seem to effortlessly command attention and build meaningful connections that advance their careers and enrich their lives. I am Dale Carnegie, and I transformed myself from a shy Missouri farm boy who was terrified to speak in public into the man who taught millions to overcome their deepest social fears. For over 3 decades, I studied human nature and developed the principles that turn stammering, anxious individuals into confident communicators who could walk into any room and connect with anyone. What I discovered about conquering social anxiety will transform how you show up in every social and professional situation, giving you the tools to turn your greatest weakness into your most powerful strength. But first, like this video, subscribe for more life-changing insights, and comment your location below. Let's see how far this transformation needs to travel. I want you to understand something about the boy I once was, because if you've ever felt invisible in a crowd, paralyzed by the thought of speaking up, or convinced that everyone else was born with some social gene you're missing, then you'll recognize the prison I built around myself on that Missouri farm. Picture this: a scrawny kid in patched overalls, sitting in the back corner of a one-room schoolhouse, praying to God that Miss Henderson wouldn't call on me to recite. My heart would pound so hard I was certain everyone could hear it. My palms would sweat until I couldn't hold my pencil properly. And when she inevitably did call my name, Dale, please stand and recite the Gettysburg Address, I would feel my face flush crimson as I stammered through the first few lines before my voice cracked and disappeared entirely. The other children would snicker, Miss Henderson would sigh with disappointment, and I would sink deeper into that corner, promising myself I would never put myself in that position again. But of course, school demanded participation, and every day brought fresh humiliation. You see, I wasn't just shy, was convinced I was fundamentally defective. When the popular boys, like Jim Bradford, spoke up in class, their voices rang clear and confident. When the merchant's daughter, Mary Lou, recited poetry, she commanded the room with grace and poise. But me, I was the farmer's son who couldn't string 2 sentences together without stumbling over his own tongue. At home, things weren't much better. Our farmhouse was isolated, sitting on acres of Missouri soil that my father worked from dawn to dusk. Visitors were rare, and when they came, I would flee to the barn or hide behind my mother's skirts. My parents, bless them, were simple folk who believed that children should be seen and not heard, a philosophy that suited my terror of speaking perfectly, but did nothing to prepare me for a world that rewarded those who could communicate. The worst part wasn't the fear itself, was the certainty that I was alone in it. I watched my classmates navigate social situations with apparent ease, forming friendships and speaking their minds without the crushing weight of self-consciousness that followed me everywhere. I became convinced that confidence was something you were born with, like blue eyes or brown hair, and I simply hadn't been blessed with that particular gift. By the time I reached my teenage years, I had constructed an elaborate system of avoidance. I chose seats where I was less likely to be called upon. I developed strategic illnesses on days when oral presentations were scheduled. I became a master of blending into the background, of making myself so unremarkable that teachers would forget I was there. But here's what I didn't understand, then what I wish I could go back and tell that terrified boy. The very sensitivity that made social situations so painful would eventually become my greatest asset in understanding and helping others overcome their own fears. Asterisk. The night I walked into that YMCA building in Warrensburg, my hands were shaking so violently I could barely turn the doorknob. I was 24 years old, and I had spent my entire adult life running from the very thing I was about to do, speak in public. But desperation I learned, is a powerful motivator. I had been selling correspondence courses for ranch owners, traveling the back roads of Missouri and Kansas, and I was failing miserably. Not because I didn't know the product, I understood cattle and farming better than most, but because I couldn't communicate with confidence. Every sales call was an exercise in humiliation. I would stand on a rancher's porch, stumbling through my pitch, while he looked at me with a mixture of pity and impatience. That particular evening, I had driven past the YMCA 3 times before finally parking. A small sign in the window announced, "Debate Club, new members welcome." For weeks, I had been telling myself I would join, and for weeks, I had found excuses to avoid it. But that night, after another day of failed sales calls, I knew I had reached a crossroads. I could continue living as a prisoner of my own fears, or I could do something about it. The debate club met in a small room on the second floor. 12 men sat in a circle, and when I walked in, every head turned toward me. My instinct was to mumble an apology and flee, but somehow I managed to introduce myself and take an empty chair. The topic that night was whether the United States should increase immigration quotas. When my turn came to speak, disaster struck immediately. I stood up, opened my mouth, and nothing came out but a strangled croak. The men waited patiently while I cleared my throat and tried again. This time, words emerged, but they were jumbled and contradictory. I argued both sides of the issue in the same sentence. I forgot my main point halfway through making it. I sat down after what felt like an eternity, convinced I had made a complete fool of myself. But here's what happened next that changed everything. Instead of the laughter and mockery I expected, the men offered genuine encouragement. "Good points, Dale," said the club president. "Next week, try focusing on just one argument and building from there." Another member nodded and said, "I could see you really cared about the topic. That passion will serve you well once you learn to channel it." That's when I realized something profound. Everyone in that room had been where I was. Every confident speaker had once been a nervous beginner. The very men I had watched deliver eloquent arguments had themselves stood up on shaky legs and stumbled through their first attempts. More importantly, I discovered that my fear of speaking was not unique, it was universal. During the break, 3 different men approached me to share their own stories of early speaking disasters. One successful businessman confessed that he had vomited before his first speech. Another admitted that he had fainted during a presentation just 2 years earlier. The revelation was staggering. Confidence wasn't something you were born with. It was something you developed through practice and experience. The terror I felt wasn't a character defect. It was simply the natural response of someone who hadn't yet learned the skills of effective communication. I walked out of that YMCA building with my worldview fundamentally altered. For the first time in my life, I understood that social confidence was learnable, and that failure wasn't the end of the story, was the beginning of education. Asterisk. After that first debate club meeting, I became obsessed with understanding why social anxiety held such power over so many of us. I spent countless hours in the library, reading everything I could find about human psychology, nervous system responses, and the mechanics of fear. What I discovered revolutionized not only my understanding of social anxiety, but my entire approach to overcoming it. The human brain, I learned, is essentially a survival machine that hasn't caught up with modern society. When our ancestors lived in small tribes, social rejection was literally a death sentence. Being cast out from the group meant facing predators, starvation, and the elements alone. So our brains evolved an incredibly sensitive alarm system designed to keep us accepted by our social group at all costs. This is why your heart pounds when you're about to speak to a group, why your palms sweat when you walk into a networking event, Why your voice shakes when you have to introduce yourself to strangers. Your ancient brain is screaming, danger. If these people reject you, you will die. Of course, in modern society, social rejection rarely results in actual death. But try telling that to your nervous system. I discovered that the physical symptoms of social anxiety, the racing heart, sweating palms, trembling voice are all part of what scientists call the fight or flight response. When your brain perceives social threat, it floods your system with adrenaline and cortisol, preparing your body to either fight the danger or run from it. But neither fighting nor fleeing is appropriate in social situations, so all that nervous energy gets trapped inside you with nowhere to go. Here's what fascinated me most. The same physiological response that creates social anxiety is identical to the response that creates excitement and enthusiasm. The only difference is how we interpret the sensation. When you're anxious, you tell yourself, I'm terrified and something bad is going to happen. When you're excited, you tell yourself, I'm energized and something good is about to happen. Same physical sensations, completely different emotional experience. This revelation was life-changing. I began to experiment with reframing my nervous energy as excitement rather than fear. Instead of thinking, I'm terrified to give this presentation, I would think, I'm energized to share these ideas. The physical sensations remained the same, but my experience of them transformed completely. I also learned that social anxiety is maintained by a vicious cycle of avoidance. The more we avoid social situations that make us nervous, the more our brain concludes that those situations must indeed be dangerous. Avoidance provides temporary relief, but strengthens the fear long term. The only way to break this cycle is through gradual exposure repeatedly, facing the feared situation until your brain learns that it's actually safe. But perhaps the most important discovery was this. Everyone experiences social anxiety to some degree. Even the most confident-seeming people have moments of self-doubt and social discomfort. The difference between socially anxious people and confident people isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to act despite the fear. This knowledge became the foundation of everything I would later teach. Once you understand that social anxiety is a normal human response that can be managed and overcome, you're no longer its victim. You're empowered to work with your nervous system rather than against it. Asterisk. The breakthrough that transformed my social life came not in a classroom or library, but on a dusty road in rural Kansas while I was still struggling as a traveling salesman. I had just endured another humiliating sales call where a rancher had barely looked up from his newspaper while I stammered through my pitch. Sitting in my Model T Ford afterward, hot with embarrassment and frustration, I had a moment of clarity that would change everything. I realized I had been approaching every social interaction, whether sales calls, conversations, or attempts at friendship, with one focus: myself. What did I want to say? How did I look? What did others think of me? I was so consumed with my own performance that I had completely forgotten about the other person in the equation. That's when I decided to try a radical experiment. Instead of focusing on impressing people, what if I focused on being genuinely interested in them? Instead of worrying about what to say next, what if I concentrated on learning something fascinating about every person I met? The very next day, I had a sales appointment with a cattle rancher outside Topeka, but this time, instead of launching into my prepared pitch, I noticed a beautiful horse in his pasture and asked about it. His entire demeanor changed. For the next 20 minutes, he told me about that horse's bloodline, training, and personality. I asked follow-up questions, expressed genuine admiration for his expertise, and listened with complete attention. Something magical happened. My nervousness disappeared completely. When you're truly focused on understanding and appreciating another person, there's no mental space left for self-consciousness. Your anxiety evaporates because your attention is directed outward rather than inward. But the real magic happened next. After sharing his passion for horses, this rancher looked at me differently. I was no longer an annoying salesman interrupting his die, was someone who had shown genuine interest in something he cared deeply about. When I finally did present my correspondence course, he listened attentively and ultimately became one of my best customers. This experience taught me the fundamental truth that became the cornerstone of all my social success. People are primarily interested in themselves, their problems, their dreams, and their experiences. When you show genuine interest in these things, you become one of the most attractive people they'll ever meet, not because you're charming or witty, but because you make them feel important and understood. I began to approach every social interaction as an opportunity to discover something interesting about the other person. At the debate club, instead of focusing on my own arguments, I started paying attention to what motivated my fellow members' positions. At social gatherings, instead of worrying about making clever conversation, I began asking people about their work, their hobbies, their families, their dreams. The transformation was remarkable. People began seeking me out for conversation. They had remembered me warmly and introduced me to their friends. Invitations to social events started arriving, but the most surprising change was internal. When you're genuinely curious about others, social interactions become fascinating rather than frightening. I discovered that everyone has an interesting story if you know how to find it. The quiet bookkeeper had fascinating insights about human nature from observing office dynamics. The local baker had traveled extensively in his youth and had incredible stories from Europe. The shy schoolteacher was writing a novel in her spare time. Here's the secret that most people never learn. The fastest way to become interesting is to be interested. When you approach others with genuine curiosity and appreciation, they will remember you as one of the most engaging people they've ever met, even if you barely spoke about yourself at all. This principle became my foundation because it solves the core problem of social anxiety. It shifts your focus from self-consciousness to other consciousness, transforming every social interaction from a performance into a discovery. Asterisk. I'll never forget the moment I truly understood the power of a person's name. I was at a business gathering in Kansas City, surrounded by successful men whose confidence I envied, when I overheard a conversation that changed my entire approach to social interaction. Two businessmen were discussing a mutual acquaintance, and one said, "You know, I've met Jim Henderson 3 times now, and he still calls me friend or buddy. But there's this young salesman, I can't even remember his company, who remembered not just my name, but that I mentioned my son was starting college. He asked about Bobby by name 6 months later. Guess who gets my business?" That night, I made a decision that would revolutionize my social life. I would become the person who never forgot a name, and more importantly, I would treat every person's name as if it were the most beautiful sound in the world to them, because it is, you see. A person's name is the sweetest and most important sound in any language to that person. When you remember and use someone's name, you're sending a powerful message. You matter. You're important enough for me to remember. When you forget or mispronounce their name, you're essentially saying the opposite. I developed a systematic approach to mastering names that served me throughout my career. The moment someone introduced themselves, I would repeat their name immediately. "Nice to meet you, Robert." Then I would use it naturally in our conversation. "Robert, that's fascinating. Tell me more about your work in banking, Robert." Before parting, I would use their name again. "It's been a pleasure talking with you, Robert. I hope to see you again soon." But repetition alone wasn't enough. I discovered that association was the key to permanent retention. If I met Robert the banker, I would immediately create a mental picture connecting his face to his name and profession. I might imagine him as Robert the robber. Instead of stealing money, he was safeguarding it in a bank vault. The more vivid and unusual the association, the better it stuck. For difficult or unusual names, I developed the habit of asking people to spell them or share their origin. Kowalski, that's Polish, isn't it? How do you spell that? People are always flattered when you show genuine interest in their name's background, and the extra attention helps cement it in your memory. I began carrying a small notebook where I would jot down names along with personal details immediately after meeting people. Robert Kowalski, First National Banksman, starting at University of Missouri, loves fishing. This became my secret weapon for building relationships. The transformation in how people responded to me was immediate and dramatic. When I would see Robert Kowalski 3 months later and say, "Robert, how's your son enjoying his first semester at Missouri? And have you had any luck with that fishing trip you were planning?" His face would light up with genuine pleasure and surprise. Here's what I learned. Most people are terrible with names because they're not really listening when introductions are made. They're thinking about what they're going to say next, or they're anxious about the impression they're making. But when you train yourself to focus completely on the other person during introductions, remembering their name becomes natural. The psychological impact goes far beyond mere politeness. When you consistently remember and use people's names, you begin to build a reputation as someone who cares about others. People start to seek you out because they know you'll make them feel valued and important. But perhaps the most surprising benefit was personal. Focusing intently on learning and remembering names gave me something specific to concentrate on during social interactions, which significantly reduced my anxiety. Instead of worrying about how I was coming across, I was mentally rehearsing names and associations. My nervous energy found a productive outlet. This simple practice became one of the cornerstones of my social confidence. When you make people feel important by remembering their names, they respond with warmth and openness that makes every subsequent interaction easier and more enjoyable. Asterisk, asterisk. The most transformative conversation of my early career happened when I wasn't talking at all. I was at a dinner party in St. Louis, seated next to a distinguished gentleman who had just returned from a business trip to Europe. My old instincts told me to impress him with my own travel aspirations and business insights, but something made me pause and simply ask, "What was the most interesting part of your trip?" For the next hour and a half, I barely spoke a word. This man shared fascinating stories about London's financial district, described the rebuilding efforts in post-war Europe, and painted vivid pictures of cultures I had only read about. I asked occasional follow-up questions. What surprised you most about their business practices? Or how did that compare to what you expected? But mostly, I just listened with complete attention. At the end of the evening, as we were saying our goodbyes, this distinguished gentleman took my hand and said, "Dale, you're one of the most interesting conversationalists I've ever met. I hope we have the chance to talk again soon." I had barely said 50 words all evening, yet he considered me fascinating. That's when I truly understood the power of listening. Most people think good conversation means being witty, charming, or knowledgeable. But I discovered that the secret to being considered a brilliant conversationalist is to be a brilliant listener. People don't want to be impressed by you, they want to be understood by you. I began to study the difference between hearing and truly listening. Hearing is passive. It's simply the physical process of sound waves reaching your ears. Listening is active. It requires your full attention, your curiosity, and your emotional engagement. When someone is speaking, most people are either waiting for their turn to talk or mentally preparing their response. But true listening means temporarily setting aside your own thoughts and experiences to fully enter the speaker's world. I've developed what I came to call my 3-step listening system. First, I would focus my complete attention on just their words, but their emotions, their body language, their underlying concerns. Second, I I would reflect back what I heard to ensure I understood correctly. So what you're saying is ... or it sounds like you feel ... Third, I would ask questions that encourage them to go deeper. What happened next? Or how did that make you feel? The results were remarkable. People began seeking me out for important conversations. They would tell me things they had never shared with anyone else. Business opportunities started flowing my way because people trusted me with their ideas and concerns. I was becoming known as someone who truly cared about others, and the reputation was well deserved, because I had learned to genuinely care. But here's the most important discovery. Anxious people, once they learn to listen properly, often become the most effective listeners of all. Why? Because we're naturally attuned to emotions and subtle cues. Our sensitivity, which once made social situations painful, becomes our greatest asset when channeled toward understanding others. I realized that my years of social anxiety had taught me to read people carefully, to notice when someone was uncomfortable, when they needed encouragement, when they wanted to be heard. These were exactly the skills that made for exceptional listening. When you become genuinely fascinated by other people's stories, experiences, and perspectives, something magical happens. Your own self-consciousness disappears. You can't simultaneously worry about how you're coming across and be completely absorbed in understanding someone else. The anxiety that once paralyzed me in social situations evaporated when I learned to direct all my attention outward. True listening is a gift you give to others, but it's also the key to your own social freedom. I stumbled upon one of the most powerful tools for overcoming social anxiety quite by accident. During a period when I was experimenting with everything I could think of to build my confidence, I had been reading about the work of psychologist William James, who proposed that our actions could influence our emotions, not just the other way around. James suggested that we don't smile because we're happy. We become happy because we smile. This seemed backwards to me at first, but I decided to test it. For 1 week, I committed to smiling genuinely at every person I encountered, regardless of how nervous or uncomfortable I felt inside. The experiment began on a Monday morning as I walked to the local diner for breakfast. Normally, I would keep my head down and avoid eye contact, but this time I looked up and smiled at the first person I passed on the street. The elderly gentleman was so surprised that he stopped, tipped his hat, and said, "Good morning, young man. Beautiful day, isn't it?" His response was so warm and unexpected that I found myself genuinely smiling for the rest of the walk at the diner. Instead of mumbling my order while studying the menu, I looked the waitress in the eye, smiled, and said, "Good morning. That coffee smells wonderful." Her entire demeanor brightened. She recommended the apple pie, told me it was fresh from the oven, and even brought me an extra pat of butter without being asked. The atmosphere of the entire interaction had transformed. But here's what fascinated me most. I began to notice that my internal emotional state was shifting along with my external expression. The act of smiling, even when I didn't initially feel like it, actually began to generate feelings of warmth and confidence. It was as if my facial muscles were sending signals to my brain. "We're happy and confident down here, so you should feel that way too." I discovered there's a neurological basis for this phenomenon. When you smile, your facial muscles trigger the release of endorphins and serotonin, the same chemicals that create natural feelings of happiness and well-being. Your brain literally becomes more positive when your face is arranged in a smile. But not all smiles are created equal. I learned to distinguish between a social smile, the polite, surface-level expression we use out of obligation, and a genuine smile that engages the muscles around the eyes and radiates authentic warmth. The genuine smile, what researchers later called the Dushan smile, has far more powerful effects both on others and on your own emotional state. I began practicing in front of a mirror, not to perfect a fake expression, but to understand what a genuine smile felt like from the inside. I would think of something that brought me real joy: my mother's laugh, a beautiful sunset, the satisfaction of helping someone, and watch how my face naturally responded. Then I would practice accessing that same feeling and expression even when I wasn't thinking about something specifically joyful. The transformation in my social interactions was remarkable. People began responding to me with unprecedented warmth and openness. Conversations flowed more easily. Business opportunities increased. But most importantly, I began to actually feel more confident and optimistic. I realized that smiling creates a positive feedback loop. When you smile genuinely at others, they respond with warmth and acceptance. Their positive response boosts your confidence and gives you reasons to smile authentically. This creates even more positive interactions, which builds even more confidence. The simple act of smiling had become my secret weapon against social anxiety. It gave me something positive and specific to focus on. It improved others' responses to me, and it actually changed my internal emotional state. I had discovered that confidence isn't just a feeling, it's also a practice. One of my most uncomfortable social encounters became one of my greatest learning experiences about the power of finding common ground. I was at a business luncheon in Chicago, seated next to a gruff railroad executive who seemed to have nothing in common with a struggling young salesman from Missouri. He was wealthy, sophisticated, and clearly unimpressed by small talk about the weather. For the first 10 minutes, our conversation was stilted and awkward. I could feel my old social anxiety creeping back as I struggled to find something meaningful to say. Then I noticed he kept checking a pocket watch, not an ordinary timepiece, but an intricate railroad watch with beautiful engravings. Taking a risk, I commented on the craftsmanship. His entire demeanor changed. It turned out this watch had belonged to his father, who had worked his way up from track maintenance to station master. For the next hour, we discovered an unexpected connection. We were both sons of hard-working men who had taught us the value of honest labor. That conversation taught me a fundamental truth. No matter how different two people may seem on the surface, they always share common ground if you're willing to dig deep enough to find it. The key is learning how to uncover these connection points through careful observation and thoughtful questioning. I developed what I came to call my bridge-building questions, open-ended inquiries designed to reveal shared experiences, values, or interests. Instead of asking, "What do you do?" I would ask, "What drew you to your profession?" Instead of "Where are you from?" I would ask, "What do you love most about your hometown?" These questions led to much richer conversations and often revealed surprising similarities. The stern banker and I both had fathers who emphasized the importance of keeping your word. The elegant society lady and I both cherished memories of summer evenings on front porches. The intimidating company president and I both struggled with the same challenges of building confidence in social situations. I learned that shared experiences create instant bonds. Military service, loss of a parent, the challenge of starting a business, the joy of becoming a parent, the struggle of learning new skills. These universal human experiences transcend differences in background, education, or social status. But finding common ground isn't just about shared experiences, it's also about shared values. Some people value security, others prize adventure. Some are motivated by competition, others by collaboration. When you discover that you both value honesty, family, continuous learning, or making a difference in the world, you've found a bridge that can span any superficial differences. I also discovered that shared challenges create particularly strong connections. When I met someone else who struggled with public speaking, or who had overcome difficult circumstances, or who was working to build a business from nothing. We instantly understood each other in a way that transcended normal social boundaries. The most powerful realization was this: everyone, regardless of their apparent confidence or success, has insecurities, dreams, and challenges. The polished executive worries about his children's future. The sophisticated socialite feels uncertain about her true friends. The successful entrepreneur remembers the fear of early failures. When you approach people with genuine curiosity about their experiences and perspectives, you'll almost always find points of connection. These shared elements become the foundation for authentic relationships and eliminate the artificial barriers that create social anxiety. The practice of seeking common ground transformed how I viewed social interactions. Instead of seeing rooms full of strangers who might judge me, I began seeing potential friends with whom I shared more similarities than differences. Asterisk. I learned the difference between flattery and genuine appreciation the hard way, through a conversation that still makes me cringe decades later. I was trying to impress a potential business partner by complimenting his expensive suit, his impressive office, and his obvious success. Everything I said was calculated to flatter, and he saw right through it. "Young man," he said with a weary smile, "I've heard those same compliments from a dozen salesmen this week. They don't mean anything because they're not about anything real." His words stung because they were true. I had been throwing around empty praise, hoping to win favor, but achieving the opposite effect. That humbling experience taught me to distinguish between flattery, which is cheap, obvious, and self-serving and sincere appreciation, which is valuable, meaningful, and genuinely felt. The difference lies not in what you say, but in why you say it and how deeply you mean it. Genuine appreciation requires you to look beyond the surface and find something truly admirable about a person. This might be their expertise, their character, their effort, their unique perspective, or their impact on others. The key is that your appreciation must be specific, sincere, and focused on something that genuinely impresses you. I developed what I came to think of as my appreciation formula. First, I would observe carefully, looking for evidence of skill, character, or positive impact. Second, I would reflect on why this particular quality impressed me or how it benefited others. Third, I would express my appreciation in specific terms, explaining exactly what I noticed and why it mattered. For example, instead of saying, "You're a great manager," I might say, "I noticed how you took time to explain that complex procedure to the new employee earlier. Your patience and clarity helped him understand something that could have been frustrating and confusing." That kind of thoughtful leadership makes a real difference. The impact of this approach was remarkable. People would light up when they received this kind of specific, thoughtful appreciation because it showed that I had truly seen them and understood the value of their efforts. Unlike empty flattery, genuine appreciation actually strengthened relationships and built trust. I discovered that everyone has something genuinely admirable about them if you look carefully enough. The shy bookkeeper had an incredible attention to detail that prevented costly errors. The gruff foreman had a protective instinct that kept his workers safe. The nervous secretary had an organizational system that kept the entire office running smoothly. But here's what surprised me most. Giving genuine appreciation eliminated my social anxiety in those moments completely. When you're focused on finding and expressing something you truly admire about another person, there's no mental space left for self-consciousness or worry about your own performance. The practice also changed how I viewed other people. Instead of seeing potential critics or judges, I began seeing individuals with unique talents, experiences, and contributions worth recognizing. This shift in perspective made social interactions feel rewarding rather than threatening. I learned that appreciation is like a boomerang. What you give out comes back to you multiplied. When you make others feel valued and recognized, they respond with warmth, openness, and genuine liking. This positive response builds your confidence and makes future interactions easier and more enjoyable. The most important lesson was this: sincere appreciation isn't a technique, it's a mindset. When you train yourself to look for the good in others and express it genuinely, you transform not only your relationships, but your entire experience of social interaction. Asterisk. The most valuable lesson I ever learned about handling disagreement came from one of my most spectacular failures. I was at a heated debate club meeting where the topic was prohibition, and I found myself in passionate disagreement with a well-respected local businessman about the effectiveness of the new laws. Instead of listening to his perspective, I interrupted him repeatedly, cited statistics to prove him wrong, and essentially told him his opinions were foolish. I thought I was demonstrating my intelligence and conviction. What I actually did was humiliate him in front of his peers and turn a potential ally into a permanent enemy. The aftermath was swift and painful. Word spread about my arrogant behavior, and several people stopped inviting me to social gatherings. I had won the argument, but lost something far more valuable, and relationships. That night, staring at the ceiling and replaying the evening's disaster, I realized I needed a completely different approach to disagreement. I began studying how the most diplomatic and influential people handled conflicts, and I discovered something counterintuitive. The people who were most effective at changing minds were those who never argued at all. They had learned that you cannot win an argument because even if you prove the other person wrong, you make them feel inferior, resentful, and determined to never change their position. Instead, I developed what I came to call the gracious disagreement method. When someone expressed an opinion I disagreed with, I would first find something I could honestly agree with, then acknowledge their perspective before gently introducing my own viewpoint. The magic phrase I discovered was, "I can see how you might feel that way, and you may be right. I've had a different experience, though, and I wonder if you'd be interested in hearing about it." This approach accomplished several things. It avoided making the other person defensive, it acknowledged their right to their opinion, and it created curiosity rather than resistance. I learned to disagree without being disagreeable. When discussing controversial topics, I would focus on sharing my experience rather than attacking their logic. Instead of saying, "You're wrong about that policy," I would say, "That's an interesting perspective. In my experience working with small businesses, I've seen some different results. Would you like to hear what I've observed?" The transformation in my social interactions was dramatic. People began seeking out my opinions because they knew I would listen respectfully to theirs. Business relationships improved because partners trusted that disagreements wouldn't become personal attacks. Even my family relationships benefited from this more diplomatic approach. I discovered that most people aren't really attached to their opinions as much as they're attached to feeling respected and understood. When you acknowledge their right to their viewpoint before sharing your own, they become curious about your perspective rather than defensive about theirs. The technique I found most powerful was what I called finding the grain of truth. Even in opinions I strongly disagreed with, there was usually some element I could honestly acknowledge as valid. If someone complained that all politicians were corrupt, I might say, "You're right that we've seen some disappointing examples of politicians who've broken the public trust. That's genuinely concerning." But perhaps the most important discovery was this: when you stop trying to prove others wrong and start trying to understand why they hold their views, you often learn something valuable. That businessman I had argued with about prohibition had insights about law enforcement challenges that I never would have heard if I had remained focused on proving my point. This approach didn't mean I became passive or stopped having strong convictions. Rather, I learned to express those convictions in ways that invited dialogue rather than debate, understanding rather than defensiveness. The result was that I actually became more influential, not less, because people trusted that I would treat their ideas with respect. Not every social interaction goes smoothly. And I learned this lesson the hard way during a dinner party where I committed what felt like every possible social blunder in a single evening. I called the host by the wrong name, spilled wine on an expensive tablecloth, and told an inappropriate joke that landed with uncomfortable silence. By dessert, I was convinced I had ruined my reputation forever. But what happened next taught me one of the most liberating lessons of my social education. How you recover from mistakes matters far more than the mistakes themselves. Instead of retreating in embarrassment or pretending nothing had happened, I decided to address my blunders directly with humor and genuine apologies. I approached the host and said, "Margaret, I owe you an apology. I called you Martha twice tonight, ruined your beautiful tablecloth, and told a joke that would have been better left untold. I'm clearly having an off evening, but I want you to know how much I appreciate your hospitality despite my spectacular performance as the worst dinner guest of the year." Her response surprised me completely. She laughed warmly and said, "Dale, your honesty and humor about it all makes you more endearing, not less. Everyone has off nights, but not everyone handles them with such grace." Several other guests overheard and chimed in with their own stories of social disasters, turning my embarrassment into a moment of genuine connection. That night, I realized that people don't expect perfection, they expect authenticity. When you make social mistakes and handle them with honesty, humor, and genuine concern for others, you often end up more likable than if you had been flawless all evening. I developed what I came to call my recovery system for handling social blunders. First, acknowledge the mistake quickly and directly. Don't try to cover it up or pretend it didn't happen. People noticed, and your attempts to hide it only make things more awkward. Second, take responsibility without a simple, sincere "I apologize for that" is more effective than a long, dramatic speech about your shortcomings. The goal is to address the situation and move forward, not to make yourself the center of attention through excessive self-flagellation. Third, use appropriate humor when possible. Self-deprecating humor shows that you don't take yourself too seriously and can help everyone relax. But the humor should be gentle and brief. You're not trying to become a comedian, just lightening the mood. Fourth, redirect attention to others or the conversation topic. Once you've acknowledged and apologized for your mistake, shift focus away from yourself. "But enough about my clumsy evening. Tell me more about your trip to San Francisco." I also learned to distinguish between significant mistakes that require attention and minor stumbles that are better ignored. Mispronouncing someone's name requires a quick correction and apology. Stumbling slightly over a word usually doesn't need acknowledgement at all. The most important discovery was that most social disasters aren't as catastrophic as they feel in the moment. People are generally more understanding and forgiving than our anxious minds expect. They're often so focused on their own concerns that they barely notice our small mistakes. I began keeping what I called a mistake journal, where I would record social blunders and how I handled them. Over time, I noticed patterns in what worked well and what didn't. I also realized that many situations I had initially considered disasters had actually strengthened relationships because they led to more authentic human connections. This practice transformed my relationship with social imperfection. Instead of fearing mistakes, I learned to view them as opportunities to demonstrate authenticity, humor, and grace under pressure. The confidence that came from knowing I could recover from any social stumble was perhaps more valuable than never making mistakes at all. I discovered the importance of social energy management. During a particularly overwhelming week, when I had committed to attending 5 different social events in 7 days. By the 4th event, a business dinner that should have been an excellent networking opportunity, found myself drained, irritable, and reverting to my old patterns of social anxiety. That's when I realized that social confidence isn't just about skills and techniques. It's also about energy management. Just as physical exercise requires recovery time, social interaction demands periods of rest and renewal, especially for those of us who had to learn these skills rather than acquiring them naturally. I began to study my own patterns of social energy. I noticed that certain types of interactions were energizing deep conversations with genuinely interesting people, mentoring someone who was eager to learn, collaborating on projects I cared about. Other interactions were draining large parties, where conversation remained superficial, networking events that felt transactional, or social obligations that served no meaningful purpose. This led me to develop what I called my social energy budget. Just as I wouldn't spend money without considering my financial resources, I learned not to commit to social activities without considering my emotional and mental resources. I began to be more selective about which events I attended and how I structured my social calendar. I discovered that preparation and recovery were essential elements of sustainable social confidence. Before important social events, I would ensure I was well rested, had eaten properly, and had spent some quiet time mentally preparing. After intensive social periods, I would schedule downtime for reflection and renewal. The concept of introversion versus extroversion became clearer to me during this period. I realized that introversion isn't the same as social anxiety, though they often get confused. Introverts recharge through solitude and can be quite socially skilled. They simply process social interaction differently than extroverts, who gain energy from social stimulation. I learned to honor my own natural rhythms. If I was naturally more energetic and confident in the morning, I would schedule important meetings and social interactions earlier in the day. If I needed quiet time between social events, I would build that into my schedule rather than trying to push through fatigue. One of my most important discoveries was the power of purposeful social interaction. When I attended events with a clear purpose, whether to learn something specific, help someone, or advance a meaningful project, felt energized rather than drained. Random socializing for its own sake was much more exhausting than focused interaction with purpose. I also developed strategies for conserving energy during social events. I learned to arrive early when crowds were smaller and conversation was easier. I would identify 1 or 2 people I genuinely wanted to connect with, rather than trying to work the entire room. I practiced graceful exits when I felt my energy flagging. The most liberating realization was that I didn't need to be on all the time. Social confidence didn't mean being the life of the party or the most talkative person in every group. It meant showing up authentically, contributing meaningfully when I had something valuable to offer, and taking care of myself so I could be present when it mattered most. This approach to energy management eliminated much of the social anxiety that came from overcommitment and exhaustion. When I respected my own limits and planned accordingly, I could show up to social situations feeling prepared, energized, and genuinely excited to connect with others. There comes a moment in every person's journey when they realize they've fundamentally changed. And for me, that moment came during a speaking engagement in New York City. I was addressing a room of 300 business leaders about effective communication, and halfway through my presentation, I had a startling realization. I was completely comfortable, not just managing my anxiety or pushing through my fears, was genuinely enjoying myself. The nervous energy that had once paralyzed me had transformed into enthusiasm. The audience that would have once terrified me had become a group of interesting individuals whose attention I was honored to have. The spotlight that used to feel like judgment now felt like opportunity. But the real test came during the question and answer session, when a particularly aggressive questioner challenged one of my main points in front of the entire audience. 5 years earlier, this would have sent me into a panic. Instead, I found myself listening carefully to his concern, acknowledging the validity of his perspective, and responding with confidence and grace. I was no longer the scared farm boy from Missouri. I had become someone who could handle any social situation with poise. That evening, I established my personal criteria for measuring social confidence, a kind of graduation checklist that I later shared with thousands of others on their own journeys. True social confidence, I realized, isn't about never feeling nervous. It's about being able to function effectively regardless of those feelings. The first criterion is presence. Can you remain fully engaged in conversations even when you feel anxious? Can you listen actively to others rather than being consumed by self-conscious thoughts? When you're present, anxiety becomes background noise rather than the dominant experience. The second criterion is authenticity. Are you showing up as yourself rather than trying to be someone you think others want you to be? Authentic confidence feels different from performed confidence, sits more relaxed, more sustainable, and more attractive to others. The third criterion is resilience. Can you recover quickly from social mistakes or awkward moments? Do you view challenging social situations as problems to solve rather than threats to avoid? Resilient people bounce back from social setbacks without losing their overall confidence. The fourth criterion is contribution. Are you adding value to social interactions rather than just trying to get through them? When you focus on what you can give, whether it's attention, insight, humor, or support, you naturally become more confident because you're operating from strength rather than need. The final criterion is choice. Do you engage in social situations because you want to, not just because you feel obligated? True confidence includes the freedom to say no to social commitments that don't serve your goals or values. I realized that my graduation from social anxiety wasn't marked by a single dramatic moment, but by the accumulation of countless small victories. Each successful conversation, each recovered mistake, each time I chose connection over isolation had built my confidence incrementally. The most profound change was internal. I no longer saw other people as potential threats to my self-esteem. Instead, I saw them as opportunities for connection, learning, and mutual benefit. This shift in perspective transformed every social interaction from a potential ordeal into a potential gift. Looking back, I understood that overcoming social anxiety wasn't about eliminating fear, it was about developing skills, perspectives, and practices that made the fear irrelevant. The boy who once hid in the barn when visitors came had become a man who could address thousands without breaking stride. The graduation wasn't an end, but a beginning, the start of a life where social connection would become one of my greatest sources of joy and professional success. The greatest test of my social transformation came when I decided to teach others what I had learned. In 1912, I approached the YMCA in New York City with a proposal to offer a course in public speaking and human relations. I was terrified that no one would sign up, but I was even more terrified that they would, because then I would have to prove that my methods actually worked for others, not just for me. 14 people enrolled in that first class, and I quickly discovered that teaching others to overcome social anxiety was far more challenging than overcoming my own. Each student brought unique fears, backgrounds, and resistance patterns. What worked brilliantly for one person fell flat with another. I had to develop new approaches, refine my methods, and learn to adapt my teaching to different personality types. But something magical happened in those early classes. As I helped others work through their social fears, my own confidence solidified in ways I never expected. When you teach someone else to remember names, you become even better at it yourself. When you coach someone through their first successful conversation with a stranger, you remember why these skills matter so much. I developed what I came to call the helper's high, the boost in confidence that comes from successfully helping others overcome challenges you once faced yourself. Every student who transformed from anxious wallflower to confident communicator validated not just my methods, but my own journey. Their success became proof that what I had learned was real and transferable. One of my most memorable students was a young accountant named Margaret, who was so shy she couldn't order food in restaurants without stammering. She would sit in the back of the classroom, taking detailed notes, but never volunteering to speak. For weeks, I watched her struggle with the simplest exercises, while other students progressed rapidly. Then, one evening, during a practice session on giving compliments, Margaret stood up and delivered the most genuine, heartfelt appreciation I had ever heard. She told another student exactly how his patience and encouragement had helped her find the courage to keep attending class. Her voice was clear, her words were perfectly chosen, and her sincerity moved everyone in the room to tears. That moment taught me that everyone has their own timeline for overcoming social anxiety. My job wasn't to push people past their comfort zones faster than they were ready to go, but to create safe spaces where they could practice new skills at their own pace. I learned that the most effective way to teach social confidence was through graduated exposure combined with immediate success experiences. We would start with simple exercises, making eye contact, smiling genuinely, asking one good question, and gradually work up to more challenging skills, like handling disagreement or recovering from mistakes. But perhaps the most important discovery was this: helping others overcome social anxiety completed my own healing in ways that personal practice alone never could. When you see someone else break through their fears using methods you've taught them, you realize that your struggle wasn't meaningless, was preparation for being able to help others. Teaching also kept me sharp and motivated. I couldn't afford to become complacent about my own social skills, because I knew that 14 and later hundreds, then thousands of people were counting on me to model the confidence and authenticity I was asking them to develop. The responsibility of being a teacher forced me to continue growing. I had to stay current with new research, experiment with better techniques, and constantly challenge myself to find clearer ways to explain complex social dynamics. Most importantly, teaching others taught me that social confidence isn't a destination, a practice that you maintain and deepen throughout your life. Asterisk. After years of teaching basic social confidence skills, I began working with business leaders who needed to master more sophisticated interpersonal dynamics. These executives could handle one-on-one conversations competently, but they struggled with boardroom politics, large group dynamics, and the complex social hierarchies of corporate life. This work taught me that advanced social confidence requires understanding and navigating power structures, group psychology, and the subtle ways that influence flows through organizations. It's one thing to have a pleasant conversation at a dinner party. It's quite another to command respect in a room full of ambitious, intelligent people who are all vying for position and influence. I discovered that group dynamics follow predictable patterns. Every group has formal leaders and informal influencers, spoken rules and unspoken norms. The socially advanced person learns to read these patterns quickly and position themselves effectively within them. This doesn't mean manipulation or politics in the negative sense. It means understanding how human social systems work and operating within them ethically and effectively. One of the most important advanced skills I developed was what I called social triangulation, the ability to build alliances and coalitions, rather than relying solely on individual relationships. In complex professional environments, your success often depends not just on your direct relationships, but on how those people relate to each other and to other influential individuals. I learned to map social networks consciously. Who influences whom, which relationships are strong, and which are merely polite. Where are the tensions and conflicts that might affect business decisions? This kind of social intelligence allowed me to navigate office politics effectively and help my clients do the same. Advanced networking became another crucial skill. Basic networking is about meeting people and making connections. Advanced networking is about creating value for others, while strategically building relationships that serve your long-term goals. It requires patience, genuine service, and the ability to think several moves ahead. I developed techniques for managing difficult personalities at a sophisticated level. The aggressive challenger who tries to dominate meetings. The passive-aggressive colleague who undermines decisions behind the scenes. The chronic complainer who drains energy from group interactions. Each type requires specific strategies for neutralization or redirection. Perhaps most importantly, I learned how to project executive presence, that intangible quality that makes people naturally defer to your judgment and leadership. Executive presence combines confidence with competence, authority with approachability, and vision with practical wisdom. It's less about what you say and more about how you carry yourself and the energy you bring to interactions. I discovered that advanced social confidence also requires mastering the art of strategic vulnerability. Knowing when to show uncertainty or admit mistakes can actually increase your influence if done skillfully. People trust leaders who are confident enough to acknowledge their limitations and secure enough to learn from others. The most sophisticated skill I developed was what I called social chess, the ability to think several moves ahead in complex interpersonal situations. This meant considering not just how your words and actions would affect the immediate conversation, but how they might ripple through the broader network of relationships over time. Advanced practitioners also learn to manage their own reputation consciously. Every interaction contributes to how others perceive your character, competence, and reliability. The advanced social player understands that consistency across all interactions, not just important ones, builds the kind of reputation that opens doors and creates opportunities. These advanced techniques transformed my effectiveness in business and my ability to help others achieve their professional goals. They represent the difference between social competence and social mastery. Asterisk. 25 years after that first terrifying night at the YMCA debate club, I received a letter that crystallized everything I had learned about the transformative power of social confidence. It was from a woman named Eleanor who had taken my course 5 years earlier, and she wrote to tell me how conquering her social anxiety had changed not just her career, but her entire family's trajectory. Eleanor had been a brilliant but overlooked accountant, passed over for promotions despite excellent work because she couldn't advocate for herself or present her ideas with confidence. After applying the principles I taught, she had been promoted to department head, then division manager, and finally partner in her firm. But the real transformation, she wrote, was in her children. My daughter watched me find my voice, Eleanor explained, and it gave her permission to find hers. She's now student body president and speaks with a confidence I never had at her age. My son, who used to be painfully shy like I was, now participates actively in class discussions. They learned that confidence isn't something you're born with, it's something you develop. This letter helped me understand something profound. When you overcome social anxiety, you don't just change your own life, you change the lives of everyone around you. Your increased confidence creates opportunities that benefit your family, your colleagues, and your community. Your example gives others permission to grow beyond their own limitations. I began collecting stories from former students and clients, and the patterns were remarkable. The shy engineer who learned to speak up in meetings went on to patent several innovations that revolutionized his industry. The anxious teacher who developed presentation skills became a school principal who transformed educational outcomes for hundreds of children. The nervous salesman who conquered his fear of networking built a business that employed dozens of people, but the ripple effects went far beyond professional success. Socially confident people build stronger marriages because they can communicate their needs and feelings effectively. They raise more confident children because they model the behaviors they want to see. They create stronger communities because they're willing to step up and take leadership roles. I notice that people who overcome social anxiety often become the most compassionate and effective leaders. Their personal experience with fear and vulnerability makes them uniquely qualified to help others through similar struggles. They understand that confidence isn't about perfection, it's about courage in the face of uncertainty. The business world benefits enormously when people overcome social anxiety. Ideas that might have remained trapped in brilliant but quiet minds get shared and implemented. Innovations emerge from unexpected sources when people feel safe to speak up. Teams perform better when every member feels empowered to contribute their unique perspective. I also observed how social confidence creates positive feedback loops in organizations. When one person becomes more confident and effective, it raises the performance standard for everyone around them. Their willingness to speak up encourages others to do the same. Their authentic communication style becomes contagious. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that overcoming social anxiety often awakens a sense of responsibility to help others do the same. Many of my most successful students went on to mentor colleagues, teach communication skills, or simply model confident behavior that inspired others to grow. The financial impact alone was staggering. Students reported salary increases, new business opportunities, and career advancement that they directly attributed to improved social skills. But the personal satisfaction of building genuine relationships and contributing meaningfully to their communities was even more valuable. I realized that social anxiety isn't just a personal limitation, it's a tremendous waste of human potential. When bright, talented people remain silent due to fear, we all lose the benefit of their insights and contributions. When they find their voices, entire industries and communities can be transformed. The ripple effect of one person's social transformation can last for generations, creating a legacy of confidence, contribution, and positive impact that extends far beyond what anyone could imagine when they first decide to face their fears. Asterisk, 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 as I sit in my study this evening, reflecting on a lifetime dedicated to helping people overcome their deepest social fears, I want to leave you with the most important truth I've discovered. Social freedom isn't just possible for you, it's inevitable if you're willing to do the work. The scared farm boy who once hid in the barn when visitors came calling became a man who addressed audiences of thousands without a trace of his old terror. The stammering young salesman who couldn't make eye contact with customers became someone who built lasting business relationships across the country. The transformation wasn't magic, it was the result of understanding principles, practicing skills, and refusing to accept fear as a permanent limitation. Your journey to social freedom begins with a single decision, the choice to stop accepting social anxiety as an unchangeable part of who you are. I once believed that confidence was a genetic gift bestowed on the lucky few, but I learned that it's actually a set of learnable skills that anyone can develop with patience and practice. The roadmap is clear and proven. Start by shifting your focus from self-consciousness to genuine interest in others. Master the art of remembering names and making people feel valued. Develop your listening skills until conversations become fascinating rather than frightening. Learn to smile authentically, find common ground with anyone, and give sincere appreciation. When mistakes happen, and they will handle them with grace, humor, and quick recovery. Manage your social energy wisely, building in preparation, time and recovery periods. Practice these skills gradually, celebrating small victories and learning from setbacks. As your confidence grows, embrace the advanced techniques of group dynamics, strategic relationship building, and executive presence. But remember that sophistication should never replace authenticity. The most influential people are those who remain genuinely interested in serving others. The person you'll become when social anxiety no longer controls your life is remarkable to contemplate. You'll walk into any room with quiet confidence, knowing you can connect meaningfully with anyone there. You'll speak up in meetings with ideas that advance your career and benefit your organization. You'll build the kinds of relationships that enrich your personal life and expand your professional opportunities. Your children will watch you navigate social situations with ease and learn that confidence is achievable. Your colleagues will seek your input because they trust your judgment and value your perspective. Your friends will treasure your company because you make them feel heard and appreciated. But perhaps most importantly, you'll discover the deep satisfaction that comes from contributing your unique gifts to the world. The ideas trapped in your mind by social fear will find expression. The leadership potential dampened by anxiety will emerge. The connections you're meant to make will happen naturally. I've watched thousands of people make this transformation, and each journey confirms what I learned decades ago in that YMCA debate club. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to act despite fear. Social confidence isn't about becoming someone different. It's about becoming who you really are when fear isn't driving your choices. Your social freedom awaits. The principles are proven, the path is clear, and the only question remaining is this: are you ready to claim the confident, connected, influential life that belongs to you? The journey begins with your next conversation. Make it count. Remember that every expert was once a beginner. Every confident person was once afraid, and every transformation starts with a single step. Take yours today and begin writing the story of your social freedom. The world needs what you have to offer. Don't let fear keep it waiting any longer.